Central Europe, northern Lower Saxony. Autumn work in a heather skep apiary. In a big apiary, like that of beekeeper Klindvoort, which lies near Zittensen, in the cultivated heathland area between Bremen and Hamburg, there are typically seasonal jobs. While the heather was in flower, Klindvoort's 1,500 skeps stood in stands on Luneburg Heath. After the bees had collected the heather nectar and pollen for several weeks, they were returned to their stands at the home apiary. In nearby Marschhorst, there are about 400 skeps. Those to be overwintered are selected, and those from which honey will be harvested are prepared. In the early morning, the beekeepers August von Bagen and Elke Bullmann begin this task. They go through the skeps one by one. In the skeps from which wax and honey will be harvested, the bees are sprayed with sugar solution. This will make it easier to remove them from the combs. If the heather flowers gave a good honey harvest, the bees will have built, as shown here, their combs completely to the underside of the skep and already sealed the cells full of honey. That will give a good yield of comb honey. In each skep to be harvested, the entrance is closed with moss, whereas the skeps selected for overwintering are immediately placed back on the shelves. Sometimes the old dark combs are found inside the skeps, and no newly built light combs. No comb honey and little pressed honey will be harvested from such skeps. Often, the neighbouring skep is entirely differently built up, reflecting the condition of the colony and the richness of the honey flow where the hive comes from. The skeps selected for overwintering, like this one, should be 3/4 full of well-built combs, not too old. The skep wall has to be in proper condition. The entrances of the winter skeps are left open, but entrances of the skeps selected for harvesting must be sealed. These skeps will be prepared for the next stage of harvesting, the removal of the bees from the skep. After the removal of the bees, the brood will have to be killed. This will be done by sulphuring, and for this purpose, Georg Klindvoort, son of the head beekeeper and himself a master beekeeper, digs square holes in the ground and enlarges them towards one side. He stuffs moss around the edges to make the join airtight. Hazel twigs support sulfur-impregnated paper, which will later smoulder under the skeps. Altogether, he prepares 5 holes in this way. The process of removing the bees is aided by the use of an elastic empty skep. Only skeps bound with cane are usable here. The skeps are bounced rhythmically in order to drive all the bees into the empty skep. The beekeeper then checks to make sure that the entire colony has been driven out of the skep. He calms the bees with smoke from the beekeeper's pipe. He always attempts to find the queen in the mass of bees. Bees from such a colony, with their queen, will then be added to a previously selected skep in order to increase its population. Winter colonies constituted in this way should now weigh 5 pounds. The skep to overwinter is then returned to the stand, while the skep, earlier emptied of bees, is brought to the sulphur holes by farmer Jan Klindvoort, the beekeeper's brother. Nearby, Georg Klindvoort Jr. and his father are also cooperating. The old beekeeper frequently checks the insides of the skeps, which hold the proceeds of the year's work. The skep must usually be bounced 30 or more times in order to empty it. This work requires not only physical strength, but also skill and experience. Breaking the combs has to be avoided. Patience is needed in the search for the queen. The beekeeper would bounce the skep once more if no queen were found. The skeps with fortified populations are closed with special cloths, so that they can be taken to the overwintering place the same evening. Whilst August, Georg and Elke go through the shelves one by one, the old beekeeper personally sulphurs the first skeps. For that purpose he lights the prepared smoking strips and then stands the skeps on the moss ring round the hole. Bees removed, that the beekeeper does not want for his overwintering skeps, are collected in an empty skep reserved for sale. They will have been ordered long beforehand. In order to work on the 60 skeps here in the Marshhorst stand, the operators require half a day with 5 people working. The removal of the bees is the job of August and Georg, the experienced beekeepers, and the young Elke helps. The old bee master undertakes special tasks, such as the sulphuring, while his brother Jan transports the skeps. As soon as several colonies have been assembled for sale, the beekeeper fills them into crates. The colonies are sold weighing 4 pounds each. That makes about 20,000 bees per colony. The package crates are homemade on the farm. It is work that is done during bad weather and mainly in wintertime. The individual weight of every crate has to be taken into account. Bees from different colonies put together will allow only one queen to live and to head their new colony. Bees which have flown away will collect in the winter skeps, as shown here in the foreground, skeps whose combs are built down to the spiles at the bottom. The beekeeper lets bees in 1 out of every 3 colonies overwinter in their own skep. Of the remaining 2, he adds 1 bee lot to the skep selected for overwintering and sells the other lot. In the meantime, the remaining brood in the combs of the emptied skeps has been killed by the sulphur fumes. For transport, the entrance remains closed, and the skeps are stood on their base. In this way, bees are prevented from entering, thus avoiding honey robbing. New sulphur paper is immediately put into the holes in the ground. In order to protect the combs from heat, the strips are placed into the lateral cavity, above which the skep entrance is then aligned. It has got warm under the beekeeper's protective hood, with its front woven from horsehair. Time for a cigarette. The skeps must remain in place for about 5 minutes. To prevent the bees from scenting the heather honey and collecting on the sulphured skeps, these are removed from the area as soon as possible. Jan takes them to the farm, which consists of 3 buildings, barn, living quarters and shed. In the barn is a storeroom where the skeps are packed so that mice and bees cannot get at them. When stacking them, Jan is careful to ensure that the combs remain vertical so that they do not break under the weight and let the honey flow out. The entrance should be on top. A good skep can yield over 30 pounds of heather honey. In a good year, up to 1,000 skeps are stored here. In the next room, the beekeeper prepares the bees for transport. The bees readily drink sugar solution, so they are supplied during transport with water for possible cooling and nutrients. Crystallized honey, put into a top container, serves as food for the often long train journey. The bees can sustain themselves on this for 3 days. The water used for hand washing will later be used as food for the bees. The colonies of bees for sale will be supplied to order to beekeepers all over Germany. The returns on each colony are about 50 marks. The beekeeper will take them straight to the nearest railway station so that they catch the evening train. The beekeeper also has a home apiary on the farm. Located undisturbed behind the farmstead, it's a good overwintering place, facing the sun. In space for up to 270 skeps, the colonies are fed here in readiness for overwintering. The transport cloths have already been removed from the skeps. For sugar solution, food containers are put under the skeps. Cut straw gives the bees a foothold so that they can drink the liquid. Ordinary sugar has been used to make the solution. 2 kilograms of sugar to 1 litre of warm water. The bees are given as much food as they would use in a day's work in warm weather. To attract the bees to the food, the beekeeper pours a little solution directly into each skep. Sometimes bees for overwintering are put in empty skeps, and they build new combs down to the bottom spiles in quite a short time. Overwintering colonies are located in 4 or 5 other places nearby, as well as here behind the farm. A total of 600 to 700 colonies are prepared for overwintering, about 10 times as many as a single heather beekeeper could maintain using only traditional technology. The 5 beekeepers in Georg Klintwort's business can work with such a large number of skeps only through the use of modern transport and certain rationalization techniques. After bees in all the skeps have been fed for the first time, the beekeeper must continuously ensure that the bees can obtain enough food to guarantee overwintering. Before he restarts the work, he lights his pipe smoker. Dried ferns are usually burnt in it. Because there is little nectar for the bees in late autumn, the beekeeper must feed them every 2 to 3 days. On his rounds, he gets to know the condition of the combs in his newly constituted colonies, in which the last brood of the year is now emerging. In order to ensure successful overwintering, the skeps with their contents should weigh 32 to 35 pounds after 2 to 3 weeks of feeding. On sunny and warm October days, bees can still be seen flying, before they cluster together for the cold winter months. When the cold comes, the beekeeper will cover the entrances with a screen to prevent the bees flying out on sunny days. With this, the beekeeper's work for the year is done.